Welcome to Redefining ABCD. Cool. Are you ready to go, Sneha?
Yep. Okay. So, in this week's Burnout Network episode, we will be having a conversation surrounding trauma and how cultural differences and traditions might affect the way we process that trauma. So, joining us in our discussion today is Krishma Tuli Arora, who is the author of the book From Ash to Ashes, a coming of age story that follows Mira and her immigrant family as they grapple with the stark differences between their traditional Sikh faith and the changing culture of the world around them. So, welcome, Krishma.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Can you just kind of jumping straight in? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your book, From Ash to Ashes?
Yeah, sure. So I was born in India, in Chandigarh, and I moved here when I was like 4.5, almost 5 years old with my family. So I am an immigrant, and I I mean, this book has been inspired by some true events in my own life. So very similar to the protagonist of my book, Mira. I am an immigrant. She also came at the age of 5. She also grappled with a lot of cultural differences when she moved to America in the book, as well as I did growing up here in Queens and then on Long Island, where the book takes place, actually. But I myself am also a graduate from NYU, and so is Mira, the protagonist in the story. But she deals with a lot of things, of course, which it's a fiction novel. A lot of people have asked me if it's true to my life. It's not. It is fiction. But there's definitely things um, that have inspired me to in my own life that I've brought up in the book. I'm a social studies teacher. I've taught high school social studies for about 11 years. I recently took a break because I had actually my fifth child, my daughter, who is now 16 months old, and she's the youngest. And I have, well, now I have two boys and two girls, and my oldest is my son, who is 17. So let's just put it this way: our house is always a bit of a circus, and I have all these kids to keep me on my toes all the time.
That's that's amazing. And I don't know. I mean, I guess it just for your book specifically. Can you just like what are some themes that we can start kind of looking at, or like what themes are kind of resonate in the book as readers read through it?
Yeah, well, definitely there is the themes of the intergenerational gap between parents and their children, the general lack of communication amongst families, which is very predominant of South Asian culture, as well as the cultural gap between America and India, like the Asian world and the Western world. And then how you sort of bring your own, because India is so diverse, in terms of religions, cultures, languages, the food, everything we do is so different. So there's different degrees, I find, depending on where you're from, um, in terms of how different and how difficult it can be for immigrants to acculturate to American culture, and to what degree. I find that we're always somehow in a gray zone. Whenever we're not fully Indian and we're not fully American, we're always trying to balance somewhere in between. And how we reach that balance really depends on, our upbringing and our families and their value systems. So all of that is in the book. Mhm.
Wow, yeah, we can't wait to start reading it. For listeners, we also got a copy of the book, and so we'll most probably read through it and give it some of our our thoughts after reading some of the chapters on Instagram, so you can check that out.
Wonderful.
Um, but yeah, and I kind of to talk a little bit about how you got started with the book itself. What made you decide to like write your story in like a book format? And how did you get started in trying to write like put this into a book?
So the reason I started writing this story was because I lost my firstborn son. Um, almost 18 years ago. And at the time, I was only 24 years old. At that time, now you're going back almost 20 years, like 19 years. Mental health definitely wasn't looked at the way it is today, at least not in South Asian culture. I think recently I've noticed there's a great awareness being brought to mental health concerns in our culture. But if you rewind 19 years ago when I lost my son, to even want to seek a therapist was considered weird, strange. Like, why do you need that? You don't need that. You're not really depressed. Obviously, you've lost your child, so you're sad. This will pass. It takes time. Things will heal. And I really wasn't given the access to mental health care that I really desperately needed as a young mom who lost her child. And so I didn't really know where to turn. And at the time, I was also not living in New York near my family. I was living in the UK in Manchester, where my husband's family is from. I was living with his family. So I was even more isolated. And I didn't really know where to turn. And since I had always been a creative writer growing up, I sort of started writing the story as an outlet to channel my own emotions and my own grief because I didn't know where to go and I didn't know who to talk to and what to do. So I started writing a story, an imaginative story about a family who loses their child. And in that sense, the book is very real for me because a lot of the emotions that the mother goes through when you see her grieving in the chapters, that was me, not wanting to live, not wanting to enjoy anything, not wanting to continue. So that's why I started writing the book. Um, it was a way. It was a way to cope with loss and trauma.
I think that's amazing that you were able to kind of use your hobby or your passion for writing as an outlet of sorts to kind of come to terms with some of the stuff that you've had to deal with. Um, as you have been, because it has been a very long time. You started this so long ago. As you write and as you kind of got through the thick of the book, has your emotions kind of evolved as you've written this? And how do you feel about it now that it's out, or it's about to be out?
Well, yes. So I started writing when I was 24. I finished writing when I was 41. And the hardest thing was to do was to pick up these chapters I had written over the years on and off because I moved countries. I had more children. I went back for a master's and then I started teaching and then I had more kids and I was still working. So it was a lot to juggle. So that's another reason why it took me so long. But in a way, it's a blessing that it did because what I saw was the girl who started writing at 24 turned into this woman, but along her 30s and then into her early 40s, and that's another reason why I left the book for so long because I never knew or understood how to finish it until I turned 40, and I realized that I'm such a stronger woman now than I ever was, and this woman knew how to end the book. The first woman knew how to start the book, and the last one knew how to end it. And then the rest of it was to try to put it together seamlessly, as so it wouldn't look like three different women were writing this book. But the other thing was that the writing helped me heal so much because I dedicated the book to my son. So in a way, it was like a promise that I had made to him that kept pushing me along, saying that writing about this is going to make you feel better, is going to give you clarity, and it did.
Yeah, that's really great. You were able, you kind of grew with the book, and
Yes.
that it was able to how you were able to tell your story in the different phases of your life that you did as you kind of wrote it along with it.
Mhm.
Um, I guess it's kind of diving a little bit into the themes of the book. So how do you, in your perspective, like how might like cultural traditions affect the way that we handle and process trauma? Could you go? I know we talked a little bit briefly before, but could you go a little bit more into it from your perspective?
Yeah. So there was a lot of criticism for wanting to process the trauma that I went through, like cultural criticism. I felt like, in terms of culturally, I was sort of expected to Obviously, you don't cry and everything during the funeral, but once that was over, it was expected that now you have to move on. Now you have to have another child. You can't grieve. Should you speak to strangers about family issues and what you're going through? It was sort of like a taboo to do that. Like, I was not really allowed to go speak to a therapist because I think in our culture, your issues within your family are your family secrets, and to go out in the world and share it with someone who's a stranger, um, is considered like bringing shame upon yourself and your family, and admitting that you have problems. Because, I mean, the way the South Asian culture works is that you should be acting like everything is perfect. Everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, and all is working well. To admit that you might need medication to help yourself, the fact to admit that depression is real and it has real physical symptoms, are all things I fought against, because the idea was, you don't, what are you saying, that you have problems, you're mad, you're what? No, it's saying that I'm in a state where I can't actually physically help myself, so I need to ask someone else for help. And doing that somehow is just like against our cultural traditions. I don't know if, I feel like that's still true to today in many families.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think that that still definitely resonates with the community that exists now, and there has been a lot of kind of, we're kind of, like you said on the top of this episode, we are evolving into sort of more awareness of mental health issues, and even our parents are starting to kind of ask those questions now that they've lived here for so long, and
Yeah.
they're also in that kind of crux between two different generations, and how do you start, or two different cultures, and how do you kind of come to terms with that? So I think to your point, it is getting there, hopefully. I think in the
Mhm.
next like 20, 30 years, I think it's going to slowly keep evolving, and it's going to become more of a conversation that can happen, especially in terms of trauma and dealing with what life throws at you. I guess, like, I know the book itself was a huge kind of um pl- I guess a tool for you to process your trauma, but do you have any other sort of tools and strategies that you've kind of picked up along the way? And, maybe if our listeners are kind of going through something, is there something that you would kind of give advice to them?
Yeah, sure. I would say that do something that makes you happy. Maybe you're a person who loves nature. Get outside. Force yourself to go outside into nature. If you're somebody, like, if you're someone who is usually active or fit, go back and start exercising again. It releases endorphins, feel good hormones. All these things really make a difference. Surround yourself with people who uplift you rather than people who criticize you, because the company you keep really determines how you feel about yourself. People who are positive, they make you feel good about yourself, they make you feel supported, whereas people who are critical or toxic, because they sort of bring you down with them. So be mindful of who's around you, and who you speak to. And then again, don't be ashamed to reach out for help. It's okay to talk to a social worker. I mean, it took me, you could say, 7 years after my son passed away to finally go see a social worker and accept help. And I was so much better for it. I mean, I'm not saying that whatever has happened, I'm over it, because you're never over it. You just learn to live with trauma. But what I'm saying is that it finally allowed me to feel more at peace. And so go out there, don't be ashamed, regardless of what anyone says. Seek the help that you need, get the help that you need. And don't feel that, you know, oh, it's nothing. Validate your feelings. If you are feeling down, then understand that you are down and it's okay. Um, and, um, and do something that makes you happy or that you enjoy. Um, and stay away from things that don't, even if people think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's really really true. Knowing when you need help and like asking for it is a really hard thing to do,
Yeah.
especially in our community, like you've mentioned. In a past episode, one of our guests said that sometimes family is not really necessarily just blood family. You can
Mhm.
define who your family is in time of when you need support.
Yeah.
I think that still really, really resonates. That like it's really helpful advice, and but it's typically kind of hard in our community when you can't like you should relate, you should connect with your blood relatives to get the support that you need. Um, but I was wondering when you were trying to when getting help for yourself, but was there a support system that you kind of went back to or tried to reach out to, and how did you kind of try to get that support or that circle that you need? Just maybe for listeners who are in a similar situation where they need to find a support system to get through some of the things that they're going through.
So, I mean, I don't want to say, but at that time, my husband was not a support. I wish he had been. In a way, the only support that he could really give was to finally say, "Fine, I'll allow you to see one if you want to, but like, I don't want to be involved in it." So I know there are a lot of women out there whose husbands don't support mental health because they've been brought up to not be open about their feelings and emotions, and something very hard for them to do. But where I did find support was from one of my old best friends from college, an old dorm roommate of mine. And, we would keep in touch. And she was someone who I could talk to. And she was not Indian, of Indian descent. But we had that bond, an old bond, so she knew me well, and I felt like I could trust her and she could trust me. And so she was a great support, as well as just my general faith. Um, I think in God, and then the social worker. I mean, the social worker was a miracle worker. She made me feel very safe, and made me realize that a lot of the things that were plaguing me were I was sort of doing it to myself. We do that with our thoughts. So definitely, um, it was not blood related family at all. So unfortunately, you find support where you can, and even if it's just one person. I didn't have
Right.
like five people supporting me. It was just one
Yeah.
person, and that's all I needed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true, and I think that's really great. You can find the support, like they weren't blood related, and reaching out. That's really great. I know one other aspect of the book that touches upon is also like the inevitable generational gap
Yeah.
between like the parents and kids, and that can also lead to different types of trauma.
Mhm.
It's kind of into switching into that. I'm just curious, do you have any advice for how we could start bridging the gap from your perspective as a parent, and then kind of seeing how your kids grew up or how your kids are growing up right now? Do you have any advice or kind of some of your perspective or experience in relation to that, like in terms of that generational gap?
Yeah, sure. So, as a parent, I would say be open minded, listen to your kids. And I find that a lot about South Asian parents. They have a lot to say, and the things that they want to tell their kids about what they believe, about what their kids should be doing, how they should be behaving, where they should be at this point in their life. But what they're not doing is they're not listening to their kids. They're not really hearing them in terms of how they're feeling, where they want to go, what they want to achieve. And it needs to have an open dialogue, an open discussion. Parents need to do that, because what happens is, if you keep forcing your children to repress their feelings, to repress their emotions, then it causes, in a way, for them to feel isolated from you. And then they're not able to communicate with you. They don't want to share. Then they start keeping secrets. A lot of them have secret lives, from their parents, because, they can't be open and honest. So having an open and honest relationship and dialogue with your kids is absolutely necessary. Um, the the advice I'd give to kids, like teenagers, because I have teenagers. I have teenagers, and I have little ones, so like all over the place. But I find is my teens come and tell me everything, and they're boys. Usually, like boys don't even like talk generally. You know what I mean? Like girls can be a little bit more expressive, I find, but my boys tell me about everything, like about girls, about school, about this thing and that. And it's because and they're all night owls, but I'll find the time to sit there with them at night in my pajamas and sort of like recap like, oh, what's going on, what's up with this, oh, that teacher, that coach, that because you need to make them feel that you're connected. That connectedness is a very important bond that that you can make. But the kids, I say to the kids, please be open to your parents. Like if you're on your TikTok and you're on your chatting on Snap with your friends, but now your parent is here, give them that time because um, this is a good opportunity for you to say what you want to say and be heard. And so that even your parent feels comfortable talking to you. There are some parents who are a little bit more conservative than others. Like I'll talk to my boys about girls, no problem. You know what I mean? But I know some parents won't. So maybe if you, as kids, make your parents feel comfortable, eventually they'll be open to having the more uncomfortable conversations with you. So,
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I know Sneha and I, we both have that similar dynamic with our parents too.
yeah.
It's very open-minded. Like it's okay to talk about it first rather than like try to keep it to yourself and try to figure it out and
Hmm.
get into a situation where you think that you're alone when you're really not.
Right.
So I definitely agree with you, and I hope that kind of shifts more as like we get. I feel like that will as we kind of get more generations of South Asian Americans of having that kind of open communication.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, with that, something that came out of my mind is I know this book is a personal reflection in some sorts of way for you, and you've mentioned that just out of curiosity, when your kids and family read this book, what do you hope that they would get out of this, or like what they hope to see about you through this book? Because I know your husband most probably went through his own grief process with your son,
Yes.
and your kids most probably have a different perspective or experience with it. So I guess what 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 do you kind of hope that they get out of this book when they read it?
That's actually a great question. And I hope that they see that their mother is someone who believes that no matter what happens in life, that you can, like through perseverance, you can overcome many challenges and obstacles and still, regardless of anything else, still love life, still live life to the fullest, still value every moment of whatever life brings you, um, because good or bad, um, life and the human condition needs to be celebrated because that is the beauty of our life. I mean, life wouldn't be what it is if everything was always perfect and everything was always good. It's the learning process, it's the growth that we make as human beings, as people, which is miraculous in its own way. And so I want them to see that regardless of what might life might bring their way, because they're still kids. So life's like, I mean, they have their own challenges and all, but as they get older, life may bring other challenges, bigger obstacles. How are they going to face it? Are they going to turn into alcohol abuse, like one of the characters in my book does? Or are they going to turn to spiritual guidance as the protagonist does? Where will they find their strength of character that will build them and their life? So that is definitely something I want them to take away from it. That that your mother was someone who believes in perseverance and always looking on the bright side and the positive side of life.
That's awesome, and I think I assume that that's exactly what they're gonna get from your book. I have such high expectations. I'm so
Oh,
excited to read it,
thank you.
and I was gonna, I guess kind of tailing off of that. Are you like in any way like nervous to kind of share this to the world, or is there any sort of can you talk? I can't even imagine what it must feel like to finally kind of put this out there and have your family and everyone read it.
Well, it's very exciting, but at the same time, I'm very nervous because at the end of the day, every vulnerability of you as a person and as a writer is in this book, and people, are can be very judgmental and very critical, and sometimes it's very hard to put your real and inner self out there, um, to open to judgment and criticism. But at the end of the day, the story is true to myself, and what I've learned, and it's taken me many, many years to finally understand it, is that it doesn't matter what other people think and what other people say. You have to live your life according to your truth, and that's all I can do. And I hope no one is offended by it. It was hilarious that you said that, because my husband the other day he said, but everyone's going to think that I did this. I'm like, you're not him. I'm like, I know you want to be the lover boy in the story, but it's not you.
That's awesome.
That's why I keep saying it's still a fiction.
Right, right. I mean, I guess kind of going into that a little bit, like, you talk about, in addition to the generational gap between the characters in your book, I think there's also this kind of, your book touches on the pressures of preserving one's own culture, right? So
Yes.
specifically for Mira's parents, how do you preserve your Sikh kind of roots and also live in a world that's completely different from that?
Hmm.
So I mean, I guess I will ask you, how have you defined what parts of Sikh culture you keep in your life and which parts don't really resonate with you anymore?
Well, what I love about my religion is that there's a fundamental belief in oneness, and oneness in different sense of the word. Oneness definitely in terms of we are one humanity. So to discriminate against each other based on our class, based on our race, our wealth, our status, whatever it is just wrong. And so I love that part, and you see that part in the book too. And then there's this oneness of Sikh philosophy, which I follow closely and dearly, is the idea that the universe is also one. We are one with the universe. And that was a part of the Sikh religion that helped me cope with my loss, actually. Because if you look out into nature, you see that everything in the universe is pretty much cyclical. Right. So, like, in terms of the weather, in terms of everything has a cyclical nature. And in my belief, I believe in karma, I believe in reincarnation, and I feel like the essence of our spirit, the essence of God's spirit and the universe is cyclical. So I feel like although my son, physically passed away, I feel that his spirit lives on, and it doesn't just die. It goes somewhere else, and it's his force. It's an energy force. It goes into another form, and that in itself has always helped me cope too. So there's, Sikh philosophy resonates with me today 100%. In terms of other things, there are some rituals and some beliefs about Sikhism which have evolved, that have evolved within me, from the time that I was a teenager, and things about keeping one's hair long, and my boys decided a few years ago, when they were, I mean, they're still teenagers, but when they were a little bit younger, that they wanted to cut their hair. And that was like a very big family decision, especially for myself. But then I sort of had to go back to my spirituality, which told me in Sikhism that at the end of the day, the what's more important than the physical attributes, it's the spiritual, right? It's the oneness, going back to that oneness. So in a way, there's certain things I've abandoned, and then there's certain things that I keep on. So
Yeah, and kind of going off of that, I know, like, when we're talking about the parents' expectation to kind of bring pass down the culture and ensure it doesn't get
Mhm.
diluted in some form.
Right.
Um, these aspects that you mentioned that you really hold dear to you about Sikhism, how do
Mhm.
you hope to kind of share that with your kids and like how your kids might practice or take it to how they want to build their own like character?
Hmm. Well, so my oldest son, because he's 17, and since he was 13 or 14, we have always had philosophical discussions. So, he knows where I stand, and he takes a very existentialist point of view. I think more, not that he fully believes it, but I think more to be the devil's advocate. So we have these great, like arguments and discussions about stuff. So I know he's thinking along those lines. I know there's this spiritual foundation within him that when he's ready and when he's an adult and he's decided what he's going to believe in, he's going to believe in something. Do I want him to believe in the philosophy that I believe in and I've passed on to him? Okay, maybe. But it doesn't matter. As long as he has a belief system that helps him to cope within life, that's the most important thing. Um, now, the other children are a bit younger. All of this is very deep for them. So, but, for example, I'll tell you, my other daughter, who's 7 years old, she sleeps in her room by herself and she feels afraid at night, like as little 7-year olds, do. And so she doesn't want me to leave her. And then, so what I tell her is, I've taught you the mantras, the first of the prayers. And when you feel afraid, just know that you can always pray for protection, and pray for feeling calm and peace. And so you feel protected this way. And then I put on some different hymns in her like in the room on the speaker for her to listen to as she falls asleep. So it's in a way to teach them how to cope, how to self cope, what to do when you're afraid, what to do when you feel when you're not confident, some sort of spirituality. And also just general things, which is part of Sikhism, but also part of many other religions. Just be a good person, don't lie, don't cheat, be honest, be good with people, don't be jealous. If you feel jealous, let's reflect. Why are we feeling jealous? It's okay. We can't always have what others have, and that's fine. And just be happy with what you have. Be grateful every day about something that you have. Look around at other children who are without food, without clothes, who are suffering, rather than complain about, oh, I'm bored or I have to go to school. You know what I mean? So there's always those aspects too of keeping your religion, your culture, your values, just generally, even just being a good person is the most important thing.
Yeah, that's great that you have that type of communication with your kids because I think that's the most easiest way to like kind of share what you want with your kids without
Hmm.
like the typical way where we kind of see like the stereotypicals like you should do this because I tell you to.
Yeah.
Or and people ask why and you're just like I just because you have to
Yeah.
do it. That's our tradition and you're just like, "Well, why?" So I definitely think that like that's a really great way because I think it makes it more receptive. And the
Yeah.
idea of making whatever you want from our culture, our religion, and traditions to make it how it'll benefit you and keep you going. I think that's super important.
Yeah.
But kind of because we're at the end of our episode. Just want to dive a little bit quickly into like your writing experience and your
Okay.
writing career. Can you talk a little bit about how you got started professionally writing and how you got some of the opportunities that you might have gotten before you had started writing your book?
Okay, sure. I used to write when I was a teenager. I used to write for the Sikh magazine that my dad used to circulate. Actually, he used to circulate it in gurdwaras, like local gurdwaras, all the way up to New Jersey too, like New York, New Jersey. And I used to write articles for it while I think I was a teenager, and then when I was at NYU, and I would write articles on the side. I would research a lot, read a lot. And I did have a mentor too who taught me a great deal. And so, whatever knowledge I had, I would write about it. And then later on, I moved away. I changed careers. I was in a marketing career. Then I went into, when my boys were little, they were like 5 years old and 3 years old. I went back and I got my master's in education. Then I began teaching. And then I just started writing poetry in my free time, as something that I used to do when I was younger too. So when I was younger, I used to submit my poems, to this national contest and things like that. I used to do a lot of that kind of stuff. So I always had writing, as part of me. And then I started writing for a local magazine called Brookville Living, on Long Island, where I live. And they allowed me to have my own column, which was great, because now I could. It was called Free Spirit. That was the name of the column. And in Free Spirit, I would basically sort of add a dose of spirituality every month, to the magazine. And it was basically things like, I had an article once called, like, how to live your life outside the box, or I had articles about, like, the seasons changing and like the cyclical nature of the universe in our life. Like, some were very deep and philosophical, and some were like more lighthearted, about Mother's Day, your relationship with your children as a parent and parenting things. And then once in a while, I'd submit my poetry in there too. So I did a bit of that, and then but I had my book all along, all those years too, that I was writing on and off. So yeah, but this is the first, you can say, I've had smaller publications, but this would probably be my main and my biggest project. Hmm.
That's awesome. And I guess as a final question,
Hmm.
bringing it all back to your book, Ash to Ashes, can you just kind of who are you trying to target in terms of audience for this book, and what would you tell them? What would you tell them to try to get them to read this book?
Okay. Well, I think that the target audience would be anyone who could resonate with, A, having a difficult time communicating with their parents or the older generation, B, someone who feels like they're grappling with two different cultures and finding themselves lost within two different cultures. You don't have to be South Asian and, American. You could be, it could be two other different cultures, but it's the same type of experience. Three, somebody who is, part of that also, I want to give a little sneak peek, is also part of, interracial marriages is also a
Oh,
topic that's big in the book. And oftentimes the whole stigma behind interreligious marriages and, in, I guess, intercultural marriages, you could say, and how it's still a taboo. I mean, it's so much more open than it used to be, but it's still something, that is not considered favorable, at least not in South Asian culture. So that's a big aspect of the book too. And what you see is what it does to the characters as a result. Um, Also, loss and trauma. Anyone who has faced loss or has been struggling with grief, this book will definitely resonate with them. And of course, it is a coming of age story. The main character is 18 years old for most of the book. I don't want to give it away, but there is a sneak peek into her future later on. But for most of the book, she's a young girl, and so anybody who is a teenager, is a young adult, this book would resonate with them too. So I feel like there's a lot there. Anyone with a family, it would resonate with, because it's a lot about family conflict. So yeah, there's a lot of themes in here. Anyone who loves spirituality, there's a spiritual side in the book too. So I think my audience is everyone, because I think as people we all face these things, right?
that's so exciting. And I'm very excited. Me and Kirti both, I don't want to speak for Kirti, obviously, but I'm very excited to read this book and experience it. And I'm so excited. With that, we will conclude this episode of Brown Art Network. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Thank you, Krishma, for coming on. Krishma's book, From Ash to Ashes, will be out on May 23rd of this year. So please go check it out. And it's also now available to pre-order. So we'll put that link in the description, as well as a link to your website. Krishma, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure being here.
Of course.
Mhm.
Yay.
So before you kind of leave us today, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Ravi Ray Audio. You might have heard that our intro and outro music is a little bit different this season and is definitely upgraded to a next level. That's all thanks to Ravi Ray, who was our last guest in season 2, and he agreed to help us out with our music for season 3. So thank you so much, Ravi Ray, for all your help. And if you guys want to get in contact with him to collaborate with any projects or work with Ravi Ray Audio, we are linking his information to the episode description so you can reach out to him or see all the other projects he's done. And thanks again, Ravi, and we'll see you guys all in the next one.